All right, hello everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started here. Today, we're going to be talking about adaptations and natural selection. Essentially, how do organisms adapt to their environment? So, up to this point, we've talked about periodic, episodic, and random environmental changes. Here's the FRQ from the other day. And today, we're going to talk about how organisms can adapt to these environmental changes over long periods of time. All right. So, in order to better understand how evolution or natural selection works, we're going to work through two scenarios here because I think looking at case studies or examples are the best way to kind of understand it. So, in every ecosystem, certain environmental conditions are going to put pressure on a population size. Now, when I say pressure, essentially what I'm referring to is there's going to be things in the environment that decrease a population size, right? There's reproduction that is constantly trying to make it bigger, but there's also a pressure in the environment trying to make it smaller. And these pressures can be anything, both biotic or abiotic. So how much food is available, how much competition is going on, how much space is available. All of these are going to be those pressures that essentially push down on a population, limiting how big it can be. So here we have a temperate forest biome. We have bears here, and they're going through their normal life cycles. We have elk here, which are the prey species of the bears. So one of these pressures could be the amount of elk that are available. Now, when these pressures exist in the environment, it's going to cause something called differential survival. And what differential survival means is that some organisms are going to survive while others aren't. It's just the harsh reality of how it is in the natural world. If 10 bear cubs are born, odds are a decent chunk of those bear cubs are not going to make it. Now, which bear cubs are going to survive is going to be completely based on which organisms are best suited for the pressures that exist within their environment. So, for example, I have this large elk species here, which is the prey. And if I have 4 baby cubs, the cubs that are larger and therefore can take on the elk will probably have a better chance of survival. So the smaller ones, which cannot take down the prey species, will probably disappear. Okay? So these individuals that have favored genes or favored traits based on those pressures are more likely to survive. If they're more likely to survive, they'll more likely grow up. And once they grow up, they're probably going to have their own cubs. And those cubs, on average, are going to be bigger because that big gene, the gene that makes the bears big, survived and therefore was passed on to the next generation. So we went from 50-50 on big and small to the next generation being 75-25. And this is referred to as natural selection. Selective pressures in the environment favor certain traits. Those traits are more likely to survive and be passed on to the next generation, and therefore those traits become more frequent over time. Now, when we talk about evolution, we're going to look at a different case study here because I think it does a good job of showing how evolution can be quite different than what you might traditionally think of it as. Whenever we say evolution and how we measure it, typically we do something with fitness. And fitness is often thought to be, the largest or the fastest organism is going to survive. And while that might be the case sometimes, that's not always the case. So if we look at our bear example, the biggest bear did survive. It had a better chance of taking down the elk and therefore surviving. But that's not always going to be the case. When we talk about fitness in terms of evolutionary sense, fitness is going to refer to an individual's ability to have reproductive success. And essentially what that means is which organism is reproducing the most and passing their genes on to the next generation. So let's look at an example where the fitness of an organism is not going to be entirely based on being bigger than others. So we have a population of fish here. This is a true case study. So we have a population of fish here. And essentially, the males come in 2 sizes. We have really large males and we have really small males. The females are about medium sized, and how reproduction works is these females will lay eggs in these little rock nests that you see here. And then they'll wait until a male comes along and then fertilizes them. Now, the males in this fish species have two ways of going about this. What the big males will do is they will just swim circles around these fish, and then they will fight off any male competitors that try to come their way. So being a larger, stronger, and better fighting fish is going to give you an advantage in this reproduction style. Now, the smaller males, what they'll do is when the big males are distracted, they will use speed to run in really quick, fertilize the eggs, and then sprint away really fast. So both of these reproduction methods are equally viable. One is favored by being really big, and one is favored by being small and nimble. But since both of them have equal reproductive success, we consider them equally fit because they both can reproduce despite having very different traits for size. So here's a nice flow chart that kind of shows how natural selection works. In fact, if I were you, I would probably print this out or copy it down because it does help a lot and really summarizes how natural selection works. So I'll quickly go over this before we get to the FRQ. So in a population, there's going to be variation, right? There's a bunch of different genetic variation, species variation, and habitat variation that exists within an ecosystem. Now, for genetic variation, which is what we're focusing on for this topic, that genetic variation is going to be filtered by selective pressures, right? Selective pressures will favor some traits over others. So while there is a lot of variation, not all of that variation is going to survive. If the selective pressure is really strong against certain versions of that trait, those versions will probably disappear over time. So we have selection that will favor some over the others. And then once selection occurs, the organisms that survived and therefore are doing better with the current selective pressures will reproduce, produce more generations, and that trait will become more frequent over time. And this is kind of the basic underlying foundation of how natural selection works. All right, so here's an FRQ practice and kind of an introduction to what we'll be talking about on Monday. But it says the Galapagos are a series of islands off the coast of South America. In 1976, a drought hit these islands, changing the producer populations. The figure to the left shows data collected from a bird population that was on this island. So you have pre-drought and post-drought. So using this information, you need to answer these three questions. Make sure that you have those ready to go before Monday, and we should be good. Oh, real quick, it doesn't show it on here. You see these triangles here? These are the mean or the average. This triangle here, this is pre-drought average, and this one is post-drought average, okay? I don't know if they're going to come up in a question, but if it does, that's what those triangles mean. All right, I will see you all on Monday.